Welcome to this. This is an introduction to scripting pages and SDK resources. Really, we're looking at in this the really writing ASP pages, and I'm not going to be looking at the detail of writing ASP pages that are specific to CRM here. I'm just going to be talking about what are ASP pages and trying to put that into context. After all, we're using this technology that we'll see, which is certainly now really quite an old technology, over 20 years old, and we'll look at how useful it is as a basic scripting environment and how quickly we can use it for creating customizations within Sage CRM. Now, we do use this. It is used for some of the ad hoc integrations that take place. One of the classic ones that people can use it for is the surfacing of pages from that display information that have been pulled back from accounting products or from other server-side systems. So anything that is a behind the scenes is a back office rather than a front office system, you can use the ASP pages to retrieve the information from within that database, within that system, and then display it inside the Sage CRM interface, so the users can see that. And all the pages we tend to use, we'll be using JavaScript. So we're using the API to be able to pull back information not only from the database that is the target database, but also from the metadata that Sage CRM has, so that as we build up, we'll be looking at ASP pages which are using the Sage CRM APIs to construct the pages that are presenting the information in a good way. Now, this is all for somebody who is not particularly technical, not particularly into programming, and hopefully it's going to be a nice and simple introduction. Certainly what we're going to be doing in this 50 minutes or so, we're going to be looking at what are ASP pages, why they're used within Sage CRM, and where you can start to see this. We'll touch probably on a little bit about what ASP versus ASPX pages are, but really probably not so much. That'll come up largely when we're talking about the .NET and the other types of web services later on in the training. We'll understand the key terminology that gets bandied around, things like the request and the server and the response and things, so we understand what's going on when we're thinking about scripting pages. We'll see where we put them inside the CRM structure, inside the database, inside the file system, so that we can get the pages to display. And by the end of today, I hope that you'll be able to understand the basic structure of an ASP page and see how it is defined using any combination that we want with HTML, JavaScript, and any use of client-side behavior as well. We'll see the way in which Sage CRM approaches its construction of ASP pages is to make use of scripting files and the use of the cascading star sheets to control the presentation of the information that is written out onto the screen. And so we'll see and understand all this, and we'll get to understand how we can edit and move about ASP pages as well. Although a lot of that, I think, will come out as we are looking at the next two lessons, which is really about the ASP APIs. So first of all, we know from our previous lessons that JavaScript is used throughout Sage CRM. So that's the natural language that we're going to be using. And so we're going to be looking now at really what those ASP pages are. So ASP Pages stands for Active Server Pages. So it's a little bit of a tautology. We end up saying ASP Pages. Well, it's Active Server Pages. And there is a ASP.dll program that runs inside IIS. So it's an extension to the IIS. So it is talking through the same ISAPI API that our own EWare-DLL will be talking. It's a technology that goes really, really back into the roots of the web server, IIS, introduced in 1996. And in terms of what it is, because it's acting there when a request comes in for an ASP page, that's filtered out, it's detected as it's going to be processed by the ASP.dll inside the web server. So there's an association with any files which end in ASP pages. It's then processed and the tags within the file are used. You have to think of it more of a technology than a language, because you can actually use at least two languages, JavaScript or VBScript within those files. And there are other tools which allow you to extend out to use other languages as well within the ASP pages. So we're going to see that anything that you write in an ASP page is mix of ASP specific objects, HTML tags, and then any text that you want to include on the page. Now let's remind ourselves of our architecture. What we see here is the core architecture of the EWare-DLL. The EWare-DLL here is this ASP extension, and where we see this ASP Pages and .NET sitting is part of this interaction with the web server. Now notice what this diagram is doing. It's looking at how a browser will make a request to the IIS web server. If it's just to a standard CRM screen, it goes through directly to an endpoint within the URL or URI that includes the EWare-DLL. That EWare-DLL then is going to be looking at the environmental information that is passed in to it. That includes all of the parameters which are within the URL string, and knowing and understanding whether or not this session information that contained within the URL is valid, and it will understand which part of the system you should be looking at. So the EWare-DLL is responsible for all of the generation of the HTML, the maintenance of the session, and the persistent as well of the session, and understanding where we are. And it passes through the request through to the database and then pulls back not only the core application data but also the metadata that is needed to display and render the screen. If we then think about what the ASP pages are doing, ASP pages themselves can be just a mix of core ASP technology objects, request, response, that can do things writing HTML to the page, but more likely what we're going to be doing in the context of where we are, in the context of CRM, we want our ASP pages to do something that the standard system cannot do, and that is allow us to construct pages of our own design, but using nevertheless the CRM metadata and also the database information that comes from a server database. So our ASP page there is going to be in the URL. So we request an ASP page, and then the ASP page makes a COM connection to the EWare-DLL to carry out all of the tasks that the EWare-DLL would normally do if it had been invoked directly. We eventually are going to be building up an understanding of how that's accomplished, but we do understand that the ASP pages are interacting with CRM through this older EWare-DLL approach, so it is limited on this 32-bit COM interaction. And actually the .NET extensions, the .NET DLLs that we'll construct as well later on in the course, that is also ultimately going through the eWare DLL as well. So the DLL is this core thing responsible for really deep interactions with CRM. The technology has started to change in that what we'll get is now we have this Java-based technology as well available to us. That's responsible for everything from the interactive dashboards through to the SData APIs, and I'll be talking about the new SData APIs later on within the training course. But the interesting thing about the Apache Tomcat server is that it's not a technology that sits obviously well with the ASP pages, although you'll find that within the dashboard elements that you can create web pages, the references to web pages that of course can include the ASP pages embedded within them. You can embed web pages inside the interactive dashboard, and those web pages can themselves be ASP pages. That, by the way, is quite a useful thing to be aware of, because there are some of the techniques that you will want to use to embed accounting product information inside an interactive dashboard using a custom gadget. So that's a core thing to do. Now, what we're going to look at now is where it sits, this idea of an ASP page within a web server. So imagine this. A user is going to enter a request for a web page in a browser. And that web page is going to have, if you imagine the URL, it's going to have, say, my server / my folder name / name of the file .asp. So the browser sends the request for the web page to the web server, and in our case that's IIS. The web server receives the request and recognizes the request is for a particular file. And now this is a standard file. If it was an HTML file, it would look at it, examine the extension of the file. This is a filter that's taking place within the web server, and says, that is going to be I know what that is because that's an HTML file. And if it's a standard HTML file, then it opens the file from the disk and memory and sends the file back to the browser. And then the content of the HTML file is then delivered up within the browser, and the results are processed by the browser to display within the user's window. Now that's a standard HTML page being pulled up. If we instead imagining saying, instead of the URL saying www.servername.whatever /folder /file.htm, it's now saying .asp. What happens is that in this case the browser is sending the request to the ASP page to the web server. The web server receives the request and recognizes the request is for an ASP page, again by examining the extension of the file. So this is a filter that says, I'm going to do that, and then the web server retrieves the ASP file from memory, but it's the web server is then, because of the extension that exists, it's saying, right, this ASP.dll is going to process this type of file. And the ASP file then is processed in a linear way, top to bottom, and is processed by the ASP.dll, and it is in turn, the output is then turned into basically an HTML stream. So you've got any of the code that is determining what the output should be is processed inside the server by the ASP.dll that generates out the result, which will be the HTML, which is then sent back to the browser, and then the HTML is interpreted in the normal way and normally displayed for us. That's the basic outline of what the ASP pages are doing. And so why are they used inside Sage CRM? Well, they're used inside Sage CRM to allow us to do the things that we've started to talk about. So what you're really doing is, imagine you're working with Sage 300, for example, and you want to pull some additional information, some live information from the accounting system into the CRM screen. Now you can create inside Sage CRM a metadata definition that explains how to reach and contact a particular table. Now imagine this is we're doing it in a close connection way. So your CRM database knows what the credentials of the accounting system database are. You connect to it, you're able to retrieve the data, and you're able to display it in a list, or you'll display it in a screen. But what we want to do is we want to display it into a gadget, perhaps. Well, if we're going to do that, we need to be able to determine how that's done, and that sort of behavior is best done in ASP Page to wrap it all up in the way that we want, formatting the data. But that is if you like, when we're working with an ASP page, it can access all of the information and to display it in any way we like, either coming from the CRM database or coming from any other database as well. So this is really why we're using it. And ASP Pages allow us to generate a page dynamically. So the same sort of information, or rather the same type of behavior, can be changed. The output can be changed by simply the URLs or the parameters that are contained within the URL. We can generate completely on-demand pages. The ASP page themselves can receive passed-in information, either in the form of a request that is coming in the URL, or a request that is part of a submitted HTML form. So it's either in the form of a GET, an HTTP GET, or in the form of a HTTP post. It can create all of our web pages entirely built on what the contents of the database is, dynamically changing those. And of course it does have this very, very straightforward scripting environment. And it presents to us a very easy way of ensuring that our business rules, if we're trying to express something in the server that needs to be also expressed in the browser, we can express that with consistency within the language. It actually becomes easier for us to, once we've worked out what the rule is, the business rule is that we need to define, we can actually share that and be able to ensure that it's the same in the server side as opposed to the client side. And there are possibilities of sharing details of the functions and the resources. That's possible to do that. The environment that we use to construct this is going to be in a form that is human readable. Most people can, once they're used to understanding what JavaScript is, they can mentally change it into a sort of a human type code in their head, so be able to read it and come back to it in a relatively easy way. So it's easy to change and it's very easy to update. And one of the things that we'll see about this is why many consultants really like ASP Pages from a CRM perspective, is that they are hot droppable. You can just drop in a new version of an ASP page. There's no IIS reset required because they are interpreted when the request is made. You can just drop it in and it reruns it, and it's really easy. And the way in which we work with inside Sage CRM for any of this, and I know I'm doing a lot of chat before we get on to a demo, but we are going to go into the product in a moment and start to have a think about this. But the way in which Sage CRM uses ASP Pages for, well, it's just about, you want to be able to list things out, you want to be able to have a new button on that list, to be able to say, I want to insert something, so I want to insert and be able to push data into the database, I want to be able to then find the database the database object that I've just inserted. I want to be able to then edit it as well, and I will want to carry out a delete. And knowing that we can do all these create, read, update and delete tasks within the ASP pages allows us to then think about how they fit in to the system. This is this idea that we're working on a system that needs to not have any sense of discontinuity within the main Sage CRM interface. One of the jobs that we would have to carry out as we are preparing to extend CRM is to think about how do those new pages look, how do they behave, are they similar to the way in which we would expect this to work. So this is the idea of page flow. So things will hang from the main menu, there'll be a find, there'll be a new, there'll be a if we're going into a new, what does a new screen consist of? You'll have an entry screen. You'll maybe even have, from an entry screen, once it's been saved, you'll have a summary screen. From the context of how we move from screen to screen will start to tell us what screens we need and how many elements within metadata we need to create to support that. But let's start to think about the practicalities. We'll come back to the idea of screen flow when we are looking at ASP pages in the next couple of lessons. So we're going to look at where the script pages are actually defined. So this is where I'm going to switch into my install of CRM. Here you can actually see that what I've done is I've dropped down into my Explorer, Windows Explorer, and you can see that I'm looking at the folder location, and let's just look at that folder location for you. I'm going to use a little textpad file here, drop that in, and you can see that what I've done is I've come round into a location that is down underneath the program files, underneath Sage, underneath CRM. Then I have the install name, which in my case is CRM, underneath www-root and underneath custom pages. That's where any of the ASP pages that you write are going to sit. And an ASP page is going to have a very, very simple structure, and inside here we've got actually a few examples of what these look like. I'm going to go down into a subfile folder and just pull up one of these files. I should actually go and do this. I'm going to open up with my Visual Studio. So I'll pull up one of these files, and what we can see is that it's got in here a couple of references to include files. I'll be explaining those a little bit later on, a link to a style sheet, and then it has a structure which is largely HTML based. And so if I, for example, decide to create for myself a new file, I'm going to call this an HTML file. We have our basic HTML structure here, and if I save this as, I'm going to go down into where I've got my CRM, into CRM, into www-root, and what I'm going to call this is, into custom pages, I'm going to call this test page 1.asp. And so I've saved that as an ASP page. Now, ASP pages are at their heart just a plain bit of HTML. So I've saved this as HTML. You can see the structure of this, and I've got here its body is going to be test page. How we call that from within inside Sage CRM is really straightforward. So if I switch over into CRM, I'm going to go into administration, and I'm going to go into advanced customization. This is because I want to edit one of the system menus, and I'm going to alter the My CRM menu, which is the user menu. So in here, I'm going to then call test page, and this is running the custom file, and I want to call this test page 1.asp, and so I add that in and choose save. Now within the My CRM menu, I should have test page, which I've called, and you can see that it just calls test page, literally doing what we said here. We'll see that we can add in more and more behavior, thinking about what it consists of. So we've started to understand where these files can sit and where they can be defined. We're going to see that there's a basic structure. I'll come back to the idea of defining the basic structure using certain include files and how we would build it using Visual Studio in a moment. But we understand that we're dropping in our files into the CRM location. So let's define a page using HTML, client-side script, and server-side JavaScript. So we're going to what we're going to do is understand that we can create some behavior. What I'm going to do is we're going to use some of these things. I'm going to use an HTML file that I've just created, testpage.1, and I'm going to, and I've shown you that it will write out any of the HTML that we want. But the big thing about ASP Pages is that you have capacity to do things server-side. You have the capacity to be able to indicate that you've got a script to rerun at the server. Now, ASP Pages have a couple of ways of indicating the script should be run on the server, but the one we use within CRM most is to use these strange little tag delimiters, which indicates that this is JavaScript to be run at the server. And I need to do that. Now, one of the things that I need to do is to make sure that the language that I'm using is JavaScript. That's actually a pretty important thing to do. If I look at this folder, or this file I should say, up here, this eware.js file, or I could look at the crm.js file. Let's have a look at that. I'm going to open that in TextPad. This happens to be just one of my little text editors. You can see that right at the top it's declaring the language to be JavaScript. And so any of the code that I'm writing, I should also declare as the language that I'm using is JavaScript. You notice it's got these percent indicators, the markers to indicate that everything here is indicating that it is server-side code. And when we come on to starting to construct this, that needing to declare the language as being in JavaScript is important, because that will reflect as to what we're then doing within any code that we write. So I'm going to use just this response.write to change what I'm writing out to be hello world. So I had here test page. Well, I'm also going to now do a %, mark that out, and I'm going to say response dot write. I'll say hello world. So this is a tiny fragment of code that if I pull back into my browser, this is still my test page in here. I'm going to refresh this, and you can see I've written out my hello world as well. Now, I've just used there a object within ASP Pages known as the response object. So we've got different files that are going to be doing different things, and I'll start to talk about those in a moment. But inside Sage CRM, we tend to use include files a lot. Now, the basic include files would be, if we're writing our page, would be to say I want to include the Sage CRM.js include file. Now, that include file, that JS file, is basically doing two things. It's first of all declares the language that is being used. The default language for ASP Pages is VB script, but as I said, we want to keep consistency with the rest of the system, so that's why JavaScript we switch over and use. And we can see that it then calls this additional file, which is Sage CRM nolang.js, which is the file that contains a lot of the instantiation of the Sage CRM object and makes those objects available to us. And that really is a useful thing. So I'm going to come back into Visual Studio and start the definition of a second file, and we'll see how this is done. So I'm going to go into File, New File. I'll create this as my HTML file. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get rid of this. Instead, I'm going to use some snippets. Now, these snippets are part of the SDK. So you download these from the community, and they become available to us. And what we see here is the include file that we want. Okay. I'm calling this a test page, or I will be calling this test page, and you can see that I've included in here reference to the JS file. So I'm going to just save this, and I'm going to call this test page 2.asp, and you can see that I've got test page 2 code.js, and this is because what I want to do now is to create a separate JavaScript file, and the JavaScript file is going to contain the code of the page. So in here I'm going to say this is my response.write, and in my response.write I'm going to say hello world. So there I've just written a piece of JavaScript, and I'm going to save this as my test page, but I'm going to call this my test page code. I want to keep it as a JavaScript file. So in here I can go into snippet, and you can see I've got snippets. Inside the general snippets for the ASP pages, I have got the basic include structure. So I could have got rid of that, right mouse click, and chosen to go into snippet, insert snippet, my code snippet, Sage CRM for ASP pages, and there's the basic include structure. Now this is far more complex than we need right now. I'll be doing this a little bit later on when we're looking at the next lesson next week. But for now, all I've got is my nice little hello world. What I've done is I've written now here my structure of my test page code, and you can see that I've correctly defined my object response.write, and within here if I change the URL to read, instead of test page 1, I just change that to read test page 2, and you can see that it's now writing out the hello world. So we've got there the idea that I've just used a include file to help me define what we're doing, and I've used the structure of an ASP page within Sage CRM to separate out the code that I'm actually writing. So it's quite used to the idea of using include files to be able to structure the pages that we're writing. So we have this idea of the include files, the ASP page doing very, very little, but actually the include files doing most of the work that we want it to do. Let's have a look at some of those ASP pages that we've started to use. We're going to look at the different objects that exist within inside as the ASP environment. Of course, we are dealing with an environment that changes what we're supposed to be doing. So we when we're writing code inside the browser, it uses a different set of objects when we're writing inside the server, and when we're writing in ASP pages, we're using again another set of objects. These are not necessarily going to be available in each point, although the JavaScript syntax is going to be the same, whatever. And so what we've got here is ASP Server Object, and the server object is used to access properties and methods on the server, and this is useful. We use it inside the Sage CRM environment because it's a thing that allows us to instantiate the object. If I switch back into our code here and look at the code that we've used in the include file, and then implicitly here you can see that this is, if our include file, ASP page included reference to the Sage CRM.js file, the Sage CRM.js file then includes the Sage CRM no long file, and in here you can see that we are using the server.create object to create for us we're creating for us the instance that we need. So we've got we've got here our the include file that we need, and that's creating that's an instance of making use of the server.create object, doing that. But we can do all sorts of other things. So, for example, we may want to encode items. We may want to be able to redirect to another file. Although you'll see that there's actually a response.redirect as well. There's a difference between server.transfer and a server.redirect. But we tend to use redirect quite a lot. And that goes on to the idea of the response object. And that's actually what I've just used in the file. So we've got lots of properties that we can use here. Properties tend not to be used so much within the context of CRM because most of the, if you like, how things are set is really done inside the CRM objects themselves. There are some exceptions like expires there. So if you look inside here, you can see that we are causing the page to expire immediately. So we have no sense of caching. We don't want anything cached in the browser. Everything we hit this page, everything has to be fresh. And we use the different methods within the response a lot. Certainly the most commonly used ones are write and redirect. Write is used all the time to be able to generate the message out up onto the screen, passing back the HTML that we want, and redirect, as I said, when we are handling once a record perhaps has been edited or has been committed, we want to be able to rebuild the URL that it needs to use on the next page. So we would use a redirect to say, right, now we've done this, this is what we're going to do. We're going to send you to this location. And if we are handling edits, it's because there's a request coming in and any browser makes an HTTP request that has to be captured, and this is the object that handles that. It's important because it's got a number of collections that we're of interest to so you've got the query string. The query string contains all of the URLs, and so we could actually start to handle the inbound data from the query string. So this is how we can work out what's in the URL. So a little bit of code that will do that would be the request.query string and then whatever the file is. In our example that we were evolving here, if I go back onto here, this file has been called from a long URL. It's got information within it. It's got the SID, it's got theme information, what page it originally came from. It's got information about the context. So you've got the key for, and so I can pick up any of that bits of information. So here, for example, I can say response.write, and I'm interested in here request.query string, and I realize I've started to put that into a string when it's a method, and I'm looking here at whatever the SID is, and so I put my SID in here, and that now, if I refresh this page, I should also see an error. There we are. That's because I hadn't formatted it correctly. So I can see that I'm able to read and access the session ID within the page. And there's a session ID written out. So this illustrates how ASP Pages have got the methods that allow us to read the environmental information. That's just looking at the idea of the query string, but we also have the sense that ASP Pages are submitting forms. Those submitted forms also need to be captured, and the form variables are also contained within another collection, which is the form. So we can use the structures that we've used in a very similar way. So I used before the request.query string. This is request.form, getting hold of the posted information that we may want. Okay. Other objects that ASP Pages have include things like the Session object. This is used to store information about each user entering the website. Sessions are referring here to the IIS session, but we don't use IIS sessions because we separately manage our own sessions inside Sage CRM. But you might want to use sessional information in self-service, for example, rather than inside where we have here inside our page as a CRM user. So our authentication is completely different. It's possible as well to use cookies inside a page, and so ASP Pages allow cookies to be easily written up and written out. Again, cookies are not really used within Sage CRM. There is a little bit of additional information now more latterly as cookies are being used to help contain some information, but we tend to see cookies being used within a self-service environment, but cookies are a possibility inside inside our ASP pages, storing this small amount of information up on the client, and they needing to look at it. The last thing I'm going to mention is another thing which is really to do with if you're writing a pure classic ASP-based application, which would be something called the Global.asa file. The ASA file is an optional file that can contain declarations of objects, variables, and methods that then are accessed by every page within an ASP application. We tend not to use, well, we don't use those within CRM implementations. I've never seen them used here inside a CRM implementation. The last topic that I want to talk about, though, is the idea of the CSS files. The CSS files is something that we'll come back to again in the ASP page lessons themselves properly, but raising the question about why do pages inside CRM look like they do. So if I go all the way back here into CRM, why does this page look like that it does? I'll just remind ourselves of a simple page. Let's go into something like the opportunities list, and then we right mouse click, and on any of the controls that we want, I'm inspecting, and what we'll see is that things are referenced as being part of a class, and it's the class that is determining how things should be displayed. And this is all to do with CSS files. CSS files is a big topic in terms of its own, what CSS files do, but inside every structure that is generated from inside the CRM objects, they will be wrapped within a class. The class will differ whether this is a field, whether it's a title of a field, whether it's whatever, but you'll notice that at the top of every page that we work with inside CRM, there will be a reference to a CSS file, as you can see. So we have the different CSS files being loaded in, which determine what it looks like. And our principal item is this idea of the themes, and now we use a theme called ergonomic.css, and the ergonomic.css is containing all of the instructions that we see when we look back to our page here about what these classes should be rendered as. We can use the same thing within our ASP pages. We can reference the classes, and we'll be doing that when we come on to creating our own pages, whether they are the application extensions that we're going to be doing for new entities, or whether this is for self-service as well.